I'm just realizing that this little guy over here looks like I have a child that's in trouble, but it's not, I promise. It's something that my husband's grandmother gave him. It's called a timeout doll or something like that, and it's dressed in his grandfather's old jeans that his grandmother re-sewed to fit, and an old flannel from his grandpa. So I don't just have a child hanging out in the corner. I promise, just a fake one. Alright, hi guys! This is for English 1, and this is our discussion on Through the Tunnel. If you are not in English 1, or if you are in English 1 but you have not read Through the Tunnel, then you need to stop watching and either go find the video for English 3, go find the video for Speech and Debate, or read Through the Tunnel. If you have read Through the Tunnel and you are in English 1, then you need to go ahead and take out something to write with and something to write on. This will go in the notes part of your binder, which we are going to put together, I promise. As soon as we stop having snow days and can get caught up, we're going to put your binders together. Alright, so get out some paper and a pen or a pencil and get comfy. If you hear a little clicking around in this video, it's my dog, Carolina. She's home. She really wants me to throw her lobster. I'm going to sit on the lobster, actually, so that she can't find it, so I don't have to worry about it. I hope you guys get some snow today. It's about 7 o'clock in the morning at my house, and we don't have any snow because it's not supposed to start yet. But it is very cold in my house. It was about 58 when we woke up this morning, and that's with the heat on. But we don't have very good insulation. We're getting new insulation pumped in because our house is a little old and the insulation is running thin. Alright, do you have all your stuff out? Let's go ahead and get started. The first thing I want to do is read to you a short overview about Deborah Lessing, who is the author of Through the Tunnel. Doris Lessing, I'm sorry. This is not in your book. This is only in my book. Doris Lessing's intriguing story was first published in The New Yorker on August 6, 1955. So, if I were you, I think I'd write down The New Yorker, August 6, 1955, because that might show up on a test. It is a coming-of-age story, write that down too, that will likely interest most students. The narrative also introduces students to the pleasure of interpretive literature. Although Lessing's story is entertaining, her style is sophisticated, even poetic. Like Ullman, who wrote Top Man, her description of setting and use of color imagery clearly illustrate how beautiful language and imaginative comparisons can enhance and reinforce a stirring conflict. And that sets us up nicely to talk about the two types of conflicts in this story. So to review, we have 3 types of conflict in general, and we have 2 forms of conflict, right? So the 3 types of conflict are man versus man versus himself, and man versus a greater force. And the 2 forms of conflict are internal conflict and external conflict. In Through the Tunnel, we have 2 main conflicts. Okay? We also have a third that's kind of hanging around, but it's not as obvious, and it doesn't play as big of a role in the story as we would normally think. The 2 main conflicts are man versus himself, that's the big one, and man versus a greater force. So man versus himself is the conflict between Jerry and his heart and his mind. And then man versus a greater force would be Jerry versus the tunnel, or you could also say the ocean, but tunnel is more specific. So write that down, okay? 2 main conflicts, man versus himself, or Jerry versus himself, and man versus a greater force, or Jerry versus the tunnel. I want you to tell me in your notes Write down the answer to the following 3 questions, okay? You do not have to write in complete sentences. You can just kind of jot it down in bullet format, okay? How old is Jerry? What is his family situation? And where is his dad in all of this? Write that down. I don't know if you just heard my dog, but she's crying outside. I'm going to let her out real quick. You want to go outside? There's a rabbit outside that she just went to chase. We live in the woods. Okay. Where are we? So we've talked about the 2 different conflicts in the story. We've talked about who's involved in those conflicts. And we've talked about Jerry's age, his family situation, and where his dad is in all of this. And his dad's absence in all of this plays a big role, because it kind of sets up Jerry in this confusing situation in which he feels like he needs to take care of his mom because she is a widow, and he also still has a need to be a young boy. He's still learning. He's still learning how to be a young man, much like all of you young men. Ladies, you are learning how to be a young lady, not a young man. But if you lost your parent, it would put you in a very difficult situation of having to feel like you needed to take care of the other parent and also feel like you still needed the opportunity to be a child. So that's kind of where Jerry is in this situation. And he's juggling it the best he can. And that's what Lessing means by a coming-of-age story. Why do you think that Jerry cries when he cannot swim through the tunnel? Why do you think he cries when he cannot swim through the tunnel? I want you to either write it down or just think about it for a second. Jerry crying takes place on page 36. Says in the second column, second paragraph, second column, page 36, he climbed back to the diving rock and sat down, feeling the hot roughness of it under his thighs. The boys were gathering up their bits of clothing and running off along the shore to another promontory. They were leaving to get away from him. He cried openly, fists in his eyes. There was no one to see him, and he cried himself out. It seemed to him that a long time had passed, and he swam out to where he could see his mother. Yes, she was still there, a yellow spot under an orange umbrella. So why is he crying? This is one of the examples of man versus himself that we're going to talk about. Jerry is showing his immaturity in this moment. He's showing his dependence on the acceptance of the other boys, whom he doesn't really know, whom he doesn't speak the same language as, and he cannot talk to very well, and who are leaving him. He wants to feel accepted by them. He needs to feel accepted by them. And so when he isn't able to do what they do, and they seem to leave, presumably to get away from him, he cries. His fear of failure and his fear of acceptance kind of just get the best of him, and he's frustrated by his weakness. We can assume safely that the other boys are much stronger and far more used to the current of the ocean than Jerry is, because they're local. I grew up in Wilmington, and every summer I would spend my whole summer on the beach. I used to surf. That might be surprising because I don't surf now. But I used to surf, and I used to skimboard, and I was very, very strong when I was in high school because I spent my whole summer doing that. But whenever I would have friends come visit, after weeks of camp, I went to Camp Dixie, and sometimes we'd bring friends home who were from inland North Carolina. And whenever we would go to the beach, my mom would always have to remind me to not swim out in the strong currents or to not swim out past my head, because we didn't know how comfortable my inland friends would be, and we didn't know what they would do if they were caught up in a rip current. So Jerry is looking at these boys who are far stronger and used to the environment around them. And even though he knows inwardly that he's not, and that he really shouldn't be because he's not raised there, he still feels physically weak and he cries. Okay, when you have that written down, stop if you need to, go back, write that down. You can paraphrase it, you don't have to write every single word down, and then move forward. The next question is, what does Jerry fear as he is swimming through the tunnel? When he finally builds up the lung capacity and the strength to get himself through the tunnel, what is it that he fears? My English 3 class is texting me right now, so I'm sorry. Let me make sure they're okay. It's Sean Steffes. Okay, done. So what does Jerry fear as he's swimming through the tunnel? Write it down in your composition or in your notes if you feel like you know the answer. You ready? The thing that Jerry fears the most as he is swimming through the tunnel is death. Or you could also write down a fear of failure. Those are the things that he fears the most. And those are legitimate fears. They're especially legitimate fears for Jerry because he is the only child of a widow. And he does feel the need to take care of his mother. That's why in everything that he does, it's part of the reason that he keeps on looking back to make sure that she's where she's supposed to be. He wants to know that she's okay. He also looks at her for his own safety, to know that he's not completely alone in the world, but he wants to make sure that she's okay. So write that down, please. He fears death and failure as he's swimming through the tunnel. And the fear of death is compounded by the fact that if he dies, his mother will be completely alone. I gotta let the dog back in. While I do that, I want you to answer in your notes. I'm not going to tell you the answer to this. I want to check your comprehension. I want you to answer how the conflicts in this story are solved, both of them. How is the conflict of man versus himself solved? And how is the conflict of man versus a greater force solved? You can't just write down, Jerry swims through the tunnel. Tell me how he swims through the tunnel and how that solves the conflict. I'll be right back. When you have written down how the conflicts are solved, I want you to also tell me why Jerry keeps his feet from his mother. Why does he keep his accomplishment of swimming through the tunnel from his mama? All right, we have 2 more things to do, okay? The next thing that we are going to do is I want you to write down the following characteristics, and I want you to give me an example of how Jerry exhibits them, okay? Character is something we will talk about in our next unit, but we go ahead and start kind of talking about it with conflict. So the first word I want you to write down is love or devotion. You can choose either one of those, and I want you to tell me how Jerry shows love and devotion in this story. The second thing I want you to write down is immaturity. Not maturity, immaturity. How does Jerry showcase his own immaturity in this story? The third thing is foolishness. Where do we see Jerry making foolish decisions in the story? The fourth thing is impatience. Where do we see him growing very impatient in the story? And the fifth thing is maturity. How do we see him mature in this story through the course of it? Take a few minutes and do those. When you are done with those, go ahead and turn to page 42. It looks like this. It should say thinking zone at the top. Carolina, you have to be quiet. If you're going to go to school with me, you have to be quiet. Okay? I'm going to read thinking zone out loud, and then I am going to have you write down a couple of things. And we're going to go over everything quickly in school on Thursday, and we'll talk more about the thinking zone, a little more about through the tunnel, and then we'll move forward. Okay, this is just supplemental since we are not in school today. It's to keep us from being an entire day behind. Thinking zone, page 42. One of the most important yet most overlooked building blocks in a story is the setting. Though we often think of settings simply in reference to physical space or objects, it encompasses other matters as well. Setting consists of the time, place, and way of life in which the action of a story occurs. In other words, an author's choice of time and place not only demands a certain landscape or type of dress, but it may also dictate the social mores the author must work with when creating believable characters or conflicts. Sorry guys, Carolina is just having a fit. Carolina, no ma'am. Hey. No. No, no. All three aspects of setting contribute to conflicts in a story. For example, a story set in 1943 Germany inevitably addresses both the physical hardships as a result of the ongoing war and the ideological conflict that helped foster it. Another term closely related to setting is atmosphere. A story's atmosphere denotes the mood or emotion that the reader is supposed to share with the characters. This general mood can vary widely in different works, from terror to uncertainty, even to hilarity. Authors may also use specific techniques to create atmosphere. For example, an atmosphere of anticipation can be created by the use of suspense. Sometimes the setting of a story contributes to its atmosphere. For example, many of Edgar Allan Poe's famous short stories are set in sinister landscapes or spooky buildings in order to reinforce the reader's sense of impending disaster. Such stories also illustrate that a story's atmosphere usually heightens the conflicts and anticipates their resolutions. Sometimes the use of figurative language, such as similes and metaphors, can enhance setting and the atmosphere. For example, in this unit's story, Top Man, the use of personification highlights aspects of both. Personification is a figure of speech that assigns human characteristics to something that is not human. In Top Man, nature, which is the setting, is often personified, creating a sense of deliberate opposition on the part of the mountain and the weather to the climber's endeavors. In this respect, personification also serves to amplify the story's conflict between man and nature. Okay, you need to write down the definition of setting, the definition of atmosphere, and the definition of personification. Go ahead and write that down in your notes. It's finally warming up in my house, and I can take off my heavy sweater. So write down the definition of setting, the time, place, or way of life in which the action of a story occurs. Write down atmosphere, the mood or emotion that a reader is supposed to share with the characters. And write down personification, figure of speech that assigns human characteristics to something that is not human. Once you have all of that done, you are done with this video and you're done with your work for this class. Remember that you do have vocab due Thursday, exercises 1, 2, and 3 for lessons 3 and 4. Okay? Your test for chapter 1 right now is scheduled probably for next Wednesday, probably a week from today. Maybe Tuesday. I'm not sure yet. I'll tell you when we get back and once we kind of see how we have to catch up. Okay? I hope you guys have a good day. I hope you get to play in the snow if you want to play in the snow. I hope that our athletes had a good game yesterday. I hope you won. And I trust that if you did win, or if you didn't win, if you lost, that you were good sports regardless of the outcome. I love you guys a lot, and I hope I'll see you tomorrow. Bye! Now I gotta figure out how to turn this thing off.